My son called me. "Mom, I'm getting married tomorrow. I've withdrawn all the money from your bank account, and I've sold the house as well. Goodbye, Mom." I laughed out loud. That boy had no idea that the house he had just sold was not actually the house I was living in. I'm very glad you're here with me. If you can, please like this video and listen to my story all the way through. And don't forget to leave a comment telling me which city you're listening from, so I can know how far my story has traveled. My name is Thelma Jennings. I am 62 years old, and I used to think I had already been through everything life could possibly throw at a woman. I live in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, a quiet suburb where rows of red brick houses stand neatly aligned. The asphalt streets are calm and orderly, and church bells ring faithfully every Sunday morning. My house is small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen just big enough to turn around in, and a backyard garden that I take great pride in, filled with white rose bushes that bloom every summer. I work part-time at the local library. Not because I need the money. My pension and my late husband's life insurance are enough for a modest life, but because I need something to do. I need a reason to get up every morning. I need someone to talk to beyond the cold 4 walls of this house. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I arrive at the library at 9 o'clock. I unlock the doors, turn on the lights, return books to their proper shelves. The work is simple, but it makes me feel useful. Children come to borrow comic books. Students search for research materials. Elderly people like me stand quietly in the classic fiction section. All of them, even just a little, need me. There is one habit I have kept for many years. Every Sunday morning, I sit at the kitchen table with a hot cup of coffee and check my online bank account. Not because I'm worried, just out of habit. A way to feel that I'm still in control of my life, even if it's only through lifeless numbers on a computer screen. I have only one child, my son, Isaiah Jennings, 34 years old. My husband, Robert, passed away when Isaiah was only 12. A sudden heart attack on a cold November night. I remember it vividly. My scream in the dark bedroom, the ambulance sirens tearing through the night, and Isaiah's small figure standing in the doorway, looking at me with eyes full of terror. From that day on, I raised my son alone. I worked 2 jobs. In the mornings, I was a secretary at a law office, typing contracts, organizing files, answering phones. In the evenings, I worked as a cashier at a grocery store until 10 at night. I would come home after midnight, my legs swollen, my back aching, yet the next morning I still had to get up early to prepare Isaiah's breakfast before he went to school. On his birthdays, I couldn't afford expensive toys. I baked cakes at home, drew cards by hand, wrapped gifts in old newspaper. Isaiah never complained. He always smiled and said, "Mom, this is the best gift I've ever had." I turned down every travel invitation from friends, refused to buy new clothes for myself, wore the same old dresses over and over, patched countless times, all so I could deposit a small amount into my savings account each month. Small, but year after year, it added up. $127,000. That was everything I had after 37 years of nonstop work. Every dollar was tied to a memory. Lunches I skipped, worn-out shoes I kept wearing, trips I refused so I could stay home and cook. Isaiah grew into a smart and ambitious young man. He studied finance in college, on a full scholarship thanks to his excellent academic performance. I clearly remember his graduation day. I sat in the large auditorium, watched Isaiah walk across the stage to receive his diploma, and I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. So proud my heart felt like it might burst. "Mom," Isaiah said to me when we got home that evening, "you've sacrificed so much for me. When I start making money, I'll take good care of you. You'll never have to worry about money again." I believed that promise. I believed my son. Until 3 months ago, when everything began to fall apart. The first sign appeared on a Wednesday evening in late July. The phone rang. I was sitting on the sofa reading. I looked at the screen. Isaiah was calling. I answered. "Mom, I need your help with something." What is it, sweetheart? Can you give me your bank account number? I want to help you set up automatic bill payments. You're getting older, and I'm worried you might forget something important. I hesitated. Giving my bank account number to my son? Something about it felt wrong. Isaiah, I can still manage my own finances. Mom, I just want to help, Isaiah said softly, his voice sweet as honey. Banks are modern now. If you forget to pay utilities, they cut service right away. I don't want you to have trouble. I thought about the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the early mornings preparing his meals. Surely I could trust my own son, right? All right, I said, and read him the account number. Isaiah thanked me profusely and hung up. I sat there on the sofa, the book still in my hands, unable to read a single line. Something wasn't right. An uneasy feeling twisted in my stomach, but I reassured myself, he's my son. He just wants to help. The second sign appeared 6 weeks later. Isaiah came to visit with his fiancée, Corinne Blake. I had never liked her, not from the first meeting. Corinne was 26, beautiful in a sharp, calculating way. Straight, glossy blonde hair falling past her shoulders. Cold blue eyes, and a smile that always looked as though it had been carefully practiced in front of a mirror. They sat in the living room. Isaiah held Corinne's hand, looking very happy. Corinne, meanwhile, scanned the room as if appraising everything. The wooden furniture, the framed paintings, the antique clock above the fireplace. This house must be worth quite a lot now, Thelma. She didn't call me Mrs. or Mom. She used my name directly. Real estate in this area has gone up so much. Especially older homes like this. I looked straight into her eyes. This is my home. I have no intention of selling. Corinne smiled, a short, sharp smile like a blade. Oh, of course, I was just commenting. Isaiah laughed along and squeezed her hand. Don't worry, Mom. Corinne was just making small talk. But something in Isaiah's eyes made my stomach tighten. When they left, I stood by the window and watched my son's car pull away. Corinne turned back to look at the house, and I saw it clearly in her eyes. Greed. Sunday morning in late October. I woke up at 7 as usual, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened my old laptop, logged into my bank account. And my world collapsed. Savings account, $1,200. Previously, $127,000. Checking account, $53. Previously, over $3,000. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. That the banking system had an error. No, the money was gone. My hands shook as I scrolled down the transaction history. Transfer to Isaiah Jennings, $50,000. Transfer to Isaiah Jennings, $40,000. Transfer to Isaiah Jennings, $37,000. One transaction after another, until nothing was left. My son had taken everything. I called the bank. My fingers shook so badly I had to dial 3 times. Hello, this is Ashley from Citizens Bank. My money is gone. After a few seconds of typing, she said, these transactions were authorized through online banking. The funds were transferred to the account of Isaiah Jennings. Is that your son, ma'am? I couldn't answer. I hung up. I sat there, in my small kitchen, with a cup of cold coffee. 3 hours passed. No crying. No screaming. Just sitting. In my mind, images flowed one after another. Isaiah as a small boy in my arms. Isaiah waving from the school gate. Isaiah with his arm around my shoulder on graduation day, saying, "Thank you, Mom." Why? How could he? Then the phone rang. Isaiah, I answered. Mom! His voice was excited. I have good news. Corinne and I are getting married tomorrow. The wedding is in Center City, Philadelphia. My throat tightened. Isaiah, the money in my account. Oh, that? He laughed. He actually laughed. I withdrew it, Mom. I need money for the wedding and to start a new life. You still have Social Security and your pension. You'll be fine. You took $127,000 from me? Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. His tone remained frighteningly casual. I sold the house too. I felt nothing anymore. You signed a power of attorney last year, Mom. The deal closed yesterday. $340,000. You have 30 days to move out. Then he hung up. I sat there, phone in my hand, and then I laughed. Because Isaiah didn't know what he had just done. The house he sold was not the one I'm living in. It was a rental property I purchased 15 years ago, currently leased with 18 months remaining on the contract. And the house I'm sitting in right now, worth nearly $600,000, is held in the Robert Jennings Family Trust. Isaiah doesn't even know that trust exists. I am not a weak old woman, and this is only the beginning. In the next part, I'll tell you about the plan I put together that very night, step by step, to turn my son's betrayal into a legal trap he cannot escape. If you want to know how an ordinary mother prepared for that confrontation, the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I called the bank. I need to report fraud and theft from my account, I told the representative, trying to keep my voice calm even though my hands were still shaking. And I need a complete record of all transactions from the past 6 months. Yes, Mrs. Jennings, she replied, professional but with a note of sympathy. We're very sorry this happened. We will begin an investigation immediately. I hung up. I didn't allow myself time to sink into despair. I had cried enough in my life. Now I needed to work. Right after that, I called Nathaniel Price, an attorney and also a member of my book club. Nathaniel was the kind of man you trusted at first glance, serious, around 60, with neatly trimmed silver facial hair and eyes that always watched as if they could read what others tried to hide. Nathaniel, I said, I need your help. My son stole my savings and fraudulently sold a property I own. I need you as my legal representative, and I need everything kept quiet until I'm ready to act. There was silence on the other end for a moment, a very heavy kind of silence, the kind of silence of someone who has just heard something big and is wondering if they heard correctly. Thelma, Nathaniel said slowly, this is serious. How much money are we talking about? $127,000 in cash was taken from me, and about $340,000 from the fraudulent property sale. My God! Nathaniel's voice dropped. All right, I'll help you. Come to my office this afternoon. I hung up, stood still for a moment in the hallway, and looked at myself in the mirror. My gray hair was neatly combed, my blue eyes were still clear, and strangely steady. I looked like someone's gentle grandmother, and Isaiah had forgotten one thing. Even gentle grandmothers can become warriors when they are pushed to the edge. That afternoon, I sat across from Nathaniel in his dark oak-paneled office. The smell of wood, paper, ink, all of it reminded me of the years I used to work in a law office, when I was young and still believed paperwork could keep people decent. Nathaniel read every document I brought. Now and then, he paused to jot a line in his legal pad. The more he read, the tighter his expression became. Finally, he removed his glasses and said, Thelma, this is worse than I thought. Your son forged documents to sell a property he had no right to sell. This isn't just civil fraud, this is a criminal offense. He could be facing 5 to 10 years in prison. I know, I replied softly, but I need to understand all my options before I decide how far I'm willing to go. Nathaniel nodded. Smart. Here's what we do first. 1. File a fraud report with the bank to freeze any further activity. 2. Contact the title company that handled the sale. They need to know the transaction was fraudulent. 3. File a police report. You can ask them to investigate before you officially press charges. That allows you to control the timing. What about the buyer? I asked. They may sue Isaiah for fraud once they discover the tenant, Nathaniel said. They may also sue the title company for failing to catch it. But either way, Isaiah will still be responsible for the full purchase price plus damages. Nathaniel leaned back and stared at me for a long moment, as if he were asking a question that wasn't only legal, but also the question of one older person to another. Thelma, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to do this? After all, he's still your son." I looked straight into his eyes. "He stole the savings of my entire life," I said, my voice even, not trembling. "And he tried to make me homeless. What kind of son does that to his own mother?" It took us nearly 2 hours to prepare the paperwork. By the time I left Nathaniel's office, I had filed fraud complaints with the bank and the title company. The police report would be filed the next morning. I stepped out into the parking lot. It was already late afternoon. Cold wind slid through my collar. And right then, my phone rang. Isaiah. "Mom," he demanded immediately, his voice urgent. "Why is the bank calling me about a fraud investigation? What's going on?" I took a deep breath to keep my voice from breaking. "Isaiah, the bank flagged the withdrawals from my account as suspicious. That's standard procedure when large amounts are transferred. But I'm your son. You call them and tell them it's fine." "Why would it be fine, Isaiah?" I asked. "You took $127,000 without my permission." His tone changed instantly, hard, colder. "I did have permission. You gave me access to the account for emergencies." "An emergency is for helping," I said, "not for draining everything your mother owns." "I didn't steal it," he snapped back. "I borrowed it. Corinne and I will pay you back after we're settled." I could hear that sound in his voice, the sound of someone making excuses because they know they've been caught. "And selling the house was completely legal," Isaiah continued, as if reciting a prepared line. "I have power of attorney." "Isaiah," I said, each word deliberate, "I never signed a power of attorney." The line went dead silent. Then he spoke, slow but firm, like someone trying to force reality to bend to his will. "Yes." "You did. Last year, remember? When you had severe pneumonia. I brought the papers to the hospital." The blood in my body turned cold. I had been sick last year, hospitalized for 4 days with severe pneumonia. I barely remembered anything except high fever, medication, and the feeling of exhaustion, like I was being pushed underwater. Had Isaiah taken advantage of me at my weakest, to make me sign things I didn't understand? "I need to see those documents," I said. "Mom, don't make this difficult." Isaiah lowered his voice, trying to sound calm. "Everything is legal. You just need to call the bank and tell them to stop the investigation." His voice shifted into pleading, as if I were the one causing trouble. "Please, Mom. The wedding is tomorrow. I don't want this stress." Something inside my chest cracked, not pain, but clarity. "You should have thought about that before you robbed your mother," I said, and I hung up before he could react. I didn't sit down and cry. I stood still in the parking lot, cold wind slapping my face awake, and I realized something terrifying. Isaiah wasn't panicking because he had done something wrong. He was panicking because, for the first time, his mother refused to stay silent. If you have ever been manipulated by a family member with the line, "Don't make a scene, we're family," then you understand that feeling. And believe me, from that moment on, this story was no longer about losing money. It became a question. How much should a mother forgive before she turns herself into a lifelong victim? That night, Viola Brooks came to my house. She brought wine and sympathy. I told Viola everything, watching her expression shift from shock to anger. "That bastard," Viola said. "Thelma, you know I'll be here if you need anything. A witness, research, anything at all." "Thank you," I said, and for the first time in 2 days, I felt the warm weight of real friendship. "Actually, I need you to help me with something. Can you help me contact the Henderson family? They need to know what's happening with the rental property." We called them together. Tom Henderson answered, his voice full of worry. "Mrs. Jennings, is everything okay?" I explained the situation as gently as I could. On the other end, there was a silence so long I could clearly hear Tom breathing. "So," Tom said, his voice catching in disbelief, "your son sold the house we're living in without telling you or us? What about our lease agreement?" "Your lease is still valid," I said firmly. "I'm working with my lawyer to sort everything out. You are protected, but I wanted you to know ahead of time, in case the buyer tries to contact you." "My God." Tom let out a breath. "Thank you for telling us. If you need anything, a statement, testimony, whatever, let us know." After we hung up, Viola poured more wine for both of us. "Isaiah has no idea what's coming for him, does he?" she asked. "No," I said. "He thinks his mother is just a confused old woman that he can manipulate." The next morning, I received an email from the title company. My hands shook as I opened it, but this time not from shock, from the instinct that I was about to get what I needed. The email said, "Mrs. Jennings, our investigation has identified serious irregularities regarding the sale of 1247 Oak Street. The power of attorney document submitted by Isaiah Jennings appears to contain your signature, but the notary stamp is from a notary whose license had expired at that time. Additionally, the document is dated during the period you were hospitalized, but our records show that notary was in another state on that date. We are treating this as potential forgery and fraud. We have frozen all sale proceeds pending investigation. The buyer has been notified and is pursuing legal action against Mr. Jennings." When I finished reading, it felt like the room went quiet for a beat. I forwarded the email to Nathaniel with a single line. He forged everything. This was the evidence I needed. Isaiah wasn't just careless. He didn't just slip because of greed. He committed a calculated crime. He brought papers to my hospital bed. He may have made me sign while I was delirious. It could have been a blank sheet. It could have been something I never understood. And then he forged the notarization. I was still thinking when my phone buzzed again. A text from Isaiah. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come to the wedding tomorrow?" "I want you there." I stared at the screen. He wanted me at the wedding. The wedding he paid for with the money he stole from me. The wedding he was holding while I had to clean up the chaos caused by his crime. I typed back, "I'll be there. Let Isaiah think everything is fine. Let him marry his calculating bride. Let him celebrate with my stolen money and believe he got away with it. I will smile. I will take photos. I will play the proud mother. And then, when Isaiah least expects it, I will show him the consequences of betraying the woman who gave him life." The wedding unfolded exactly as I had imagined, lavish, showy, and so cold there wasn't a trace of genuine warmth. Center City, Philadelphia shimmered under the sunset as I drove to Riverside Country Club. The old building stood imposing, with towering white stone columns, stained glass windows glittering, and a lush green lawn stretching down to the banks of the Delaware River. I wore my best navy blue dress, elegant, simple, exactly the kind a mother my age would wear. I arrived early. Just as planned. Inside, the hall was covered in white roses, hundreds, maybe thousands. Flowers spilled across the banquet tables, draped in massive cascades from the ceiling, and were arranged into gigantic arches lining the main aisle. And in my mind, one sentence kept repeating, "Every single flower is my money." Crystal chandeliers overhead sparkled like snow. The tables and chairs were draped in white silk, tied with gold bows. On every table stood tall champagne flutes, plates of fresh oysters set on ice, and menus printed on exquisite foil-stamped paper. My money. All of it was my money. I looked around and automatically started calculating in my head, a habit from my working years. This venue? At least $15,000. Flowers? $8,000. Food for 150 guests? $20,000. Champagne? Add $5,000. Isaiah was using my lifetime savings to buy a party that would last 5 hours. "Mom! You're here!" I turned around. Isaiah came rushing over in a glossy black tuxedo. He hugged me tightly, as if he were the most devoted son in the world. "I'm so glad you came. I was afraid you'd be angry, that you wouldn't come." I stepped back half a pace and looked straight at his face. The face I had loved more than anything in the world. "Congratulations, Isaiah," I said evenly. "You look very happy." I am, Mom. This is a new beginning for Corinne and me. A new beginning, built on betrayal. Then Corinne Blake appeared. She stepped out in a dazzling white wedding gown studded with thousands of crystals, a 3-meter train, a veil pinned beneath a small diamond tiara. I didn't need to ask the price. I could guess immediately, at least $10,000. My money was wrapped around her body. "Thelma!" Corinne smiled. A smile sharp as a razor. "I'm so happy you came. Isaiah was worried you'd be upset about, well, you know, the money in the house, but really, it's all good for everyone. You don't need a big house like that anymore, and Isaiah and I can build our future." "How thoughtful," I replied, my voice gentle, my eyes cold as ice. A photographer approached. "Ma'am, can we take a few family photos?" I stood between Isaiah and Corinne. Isaiah draped an arm around my shoulder, beaming. Corinne held a bridal bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, smiling like a queen. The flash burst. Click, 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 photos that I knew I would never want to look at again. The ceremony began at 6 o'clock. I sat in the front row, the seat reserved for the groom's mother. Beside me were a few distant relatives I rarely saw, and some of Isaiah's friends I didn't know at all. Everyone was dressed nicely, making small talk about the weather, work, houses. No one knew. The man about to walk down that aisle had stolen his mother's money. The wedding music swelled. Guests rose to their feet. Corinne appeared, arm in arm with her father, a thin man in an old suit that didn't fit properly. Her mother sat in the front row on the other side, wearing a simple dress, eyes red with emotion. They were poor. Corinne had been telling the truth about that. And she had looked at Isaiah, the son of a wealthy mother, or at least a mother she believed was wealthy, like a ticket out of poverty. Corinne took her place beside Isaiah under the enormous rose arch. The elderly priest began the ceremony. "Today we gather here to join Isaiah and Corinne in holy matrimony." I didn't hear the rest. I only watched Isaiah. Was he nervous? Guilty? No, he smiled. He looked at Corinne with love. He held her hand as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Isaiah," the priest said, "do you vow to love, cherish, and remain faithful to Corinne, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts you?" "I do," Isaiah answered, clear and confident. And a thought flashed through my mind, cold enough to make my skin crawl. "You lie to your wife the same way you lied to your mother." "Corinne," the priest continued, "do you vow to love, cherish, and remain faithful to Isaiah?" Corinne's voice was sweet, gentle to the point of perfection. "I do." She vowed to what she truly wanted. They exchanged rings, white gold set with diamonds, sparkling under the chandeliers. I estimated each one at least $5,000. My money was glittering on their fingers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Isaiah pulled Corinne close and kissed her. The guests applauded. Someone shouted, "Congratulations!" Music rose, bright and celebratory like a joyful symphony. I applauded too. I smiled too. I even lifted a hand to wipe away tears. That did not exist. I played the proud mother. There was a moment during that wedding when I realized the most frightening thing. It wasn't that Isaiah had spent my money. It wasn't that Corinne was smiling with her beautiful mouth. It was that the entire room adored Isaiah. They saw him as a successful young man, a perfect groom, a devoted son. And I sat there, surrounded by white roses and champagne, wondering, if I stood up right now and told the truth, who would believe me? Or would they look at me like a difficult, jealous, attention-seeking mother? That exact moment made me understand. I couldn't win by shouting. I could only win by evidence. And I had evidence. The reception afterward was, in every sense, a display of excess. I sat at the head table, right beside the bride and groom, Corinne's parents, the bridesmaids and groomsmen. The appetizer was fresh Kumamoto oysters on ice with mignonette sauce, then lobster bisque, then Wagyu steak with grilled asparagus and truffle mashed potatoes. Everything was served perfectly, but I couldn't taste anything. In my mouth, it was all ash, my money on every plate, in every glass. Then Isaiah stood to give a toast. He tapped his champagne flute lightly, and the room gradually fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he said, his voice warm, sincere like an award-winning actor. "And especially, I want to thank my mother." He turned to me and raised his glass. "Mom, you sacrificed everything to raise me. You taught me hard work, patience, and unconditional love. I am the luckiest son in the world." The guests applauded. Someone wiped away tears. I smiled, nodded slightly, and raised my own glass. But inside my head I was screaming, "You're lying! You're lying in front of all these people!" And the scariest part was, he lied so smoothly that he believed himself. After that came the dancing. Isaiah and Corinne stepped onto the floor to At Last by Etta James. They glided across the dance floor, spinning under the lights, smiling at each other, drunk on love like a movie couple. Then Isaiah came toward me and held out his hand. "Mom, will you dance with me?" I placed my hand in his. That hand had signed the transfers that drained every cent I had. That hand had held documents to forge my signature. He placed a hand on my back and led me onto the floor. We swayed to the music. "I love you, Mom," Isaiah murmured, like he was whispering a secret. "I know things have been a little complicated lately, but it'll all be fine. You'll see." I looked at his face, the face I had kissed thousands of times when he was little. The face I had looked at with pride on his graduation day, now completely unfamiliar. "Are you happy, Isaiah?" I asked. "I'm very happy, Mom." "Good," I said softly. "Enjoy it." The song ended. Isaiah kissed my cheek lightly, then returned to Corinne as if I were just part of the scenery on his wedding day. I went back to my seat and took out my phone. A message from Nathaniel Price appeared. "The police investigation is open. Fraud charges are being prepared. Proceed?" I looked at Isaiah. He was laughing with his friends, completely carefree, completely unaware he was standing right at the edge of a cliff. Not yet, I thought. Let him enjoy this moment. This will be his last happy moment for a long time. I texted back, "Not yet." "Wait." As the night was nearly over, I prepared to leave. Corinne stopped me at the door as if she wanted to end the night with a final victorious line. "Thelma," she said, her voice dripping sweetness, "I want you to know I'm going to take very good care of Isaiah. You don't have to worry about him anymore." The smile was still fake, the eyes still cold. I looked at her and asked very softly as if it were ordinary polite conversation, "Then who will take care of me?" Corinne shrugged, as if the question wasn't even worth thinking about. "You have your pension. You'll be fine." I stared straight into those cold, calculating blue eyes. "Thank you for reminding me," I said. "Good night, Corinne." I drove home in silence. No radio, no tears, only a silence stretched tight like a rope. When I opened the door and stepped into my real home, the house Isaiah didn't even know about, I felt something steady and hard settle in my chest. I had given Isaiah one last chance to do the right thing. I had come to the wedding, I had smiled, I had hugged him, I had done my part as a mother. Now it was Justice's turn. I lifted my phone and texted Nathaniel, "No mercy, no compromise, proceed with full prosecution." The confrontation happened 3 days after the wedding. That afternoon, I was sitting in the backyard, carefully watering my white rose bushes. The November air was cool and clean. Yellow maple leaves drifted down, covering the lawn like a shimmering carpet. Then I heard a car stop in front of the house. A car door slammed, heavy footsteps on the walkway, and then the doorbell. Not once, but 3 times in a row, rapid and urgent, carrying an entire storm of anger. I set the watering can down, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked into the house with the calmest pace I could manage. Through the glass panel, I saw Isaiah and Corinne Blake on the porch. Isaiah's face was flushed, as if he had run a long distance fueled by rage. Corinne stood with her hands on her hips, her eyes cold and sharp as steel. I opened the door. "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" Isaiah roared, then stormed straight into the living room without being invited. "The title company froze the money from the house sale. They said the power of attorney is forged. They're threatening to press charges." I closed the door very gently, like closing the door of a room where someone had just dragged in something filthy and true. "Maybe because it is forged. You signed those papers." I looked straight at him, my voice not raised, but each word dropped like a stone. "You know very well. I signed blank sheets while I was delirious with fever, not knowing what they were. You took advantage of your sick mother." I kept my voice steady, but inside anger boiled like water brought to the edge of spilling over. "And you forged the notarization afterward. The notary you used had an expired license, and he was in California on that very day, while I was in the hospital in Pennsylvania." Isaiah froze. His face went pale, as if someone had ripped the paint off a wall. Corinne stepped forward, her voice smooth as if rehearsed. "This is ridiculous. Isaiah was trying to help you. You're old, Thelma. You can't manage your finances or your real estate on your own anymore. We were doing you a favor by stealing my lifetime savings?" My voice cut through hers like a blade. Corinne flinched, taking half a step back. But then her eyes narrowed, and the cold inside them was no longer hidden. "It's not stealing if you're too confused to manage it yourself." "Confused?" I let out a laugh, brief, but bitter to the bone. "So you think I'm confused?" "Isaiah is your son," Corinne continued, and now her voice was no longer sweet. It became calculating, cold, and blunt. "Everything you have will eventually belong to him. We just needed it sooner. That's all." "Ah," I said softly, as if I had just heard the final truth I least wanted to hear. "So you think I should die sooner, to make it more convenient for you?" "Don't twist what I said," Corinne snapped. "What I mean is you're selfish, Thelma. You can't stand seeing your son happy with someone who isn't you. You're so bitter and lonely that you want to drag him down with you." I turned to Isaiah. I waited for him to react, for him to say, "Don't speak to my mother like that," for him to stop Corinne. But Isaiah just stood there, silent, looking at me with a mixture of anger and desperation. And in that exact moment, I understood. My son had chosen his wife's side. "Are you finished?" I asked Isaiah, my voice so calm it chilled even me. Isaiah clenched his jaw and spoke like an order. "You have to call the bank and the title company. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized me to do everything. And if I don't?" Isaiah stepped closer. He was taller than I was, trying to use his body to dominate, to intimidate. "Then you'll find out just how difficult your life can become. We'll tell everyone you've lost your mind. We'll have you declared incompetent. We'll put you in a nursing home." A streak of ice ran through my veins. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Isaiah lowered his voice, low and heavy, like driving a nail. "Mom, I'm trying to be good to you here. Just tell the bank and the title company you made a mistake. Say you authorized everything. And then life will go on." "And if I don't?" I asked again, slowly. "Then we have lawyers," Corinne cut in, her voice rough. "We'll drag you through court for years. We'll drain whatever you have left with legal fees. We'll make sure everyone believes you're a confused old woman who can't even remember what she signed." For a moment, I felt real fear. Not because of those threats. I had evidence. I knew I was right. But because I no longer recognized my son. The man standing in front of me was a stranger wearing Isaiah's face. But I didn't survive 37 years alone by being weak. Get out of my house, I said, my voice like steel. Both of you, right now. Mom, get out! The force in my own voice startled even me. You have 5 seconds before I call the police. 1, 2. They retreated. Corinne spat out a few curses as she stepped down the porch stairs. Isaiah's face twisted with fury, as if he still couldn't believe a mother could say no to him. When their car sped away down the street, I stood still for a moment, then turned back into the house. I dropped heavily onto the sofa. My hands were shaking. The mask had fallen. Now I knew exactly who I was facing. Maybe you're thinking, Thelma, that's it. Just prosecute them. But the truth is, the hardest part isn't taking them to court. The hardest part is accepting that the person who hurt you most is the very person you once held in your arms. And even more frightening, Isaiah doesn't just want money. He wants power. He wants to turn me into someone mentally unfit so he can strip away my voice completely. When a child says, I'll put you in a nursing home, like a promise, that is no longer a family argument. That is war. The next morning, I called Nathaniel Price. File the police report. Bring full charges. I want them prosecuted to the maximum extent of the law. Thelma, are you sure? Nathaniel asked again. Completely sure. In the days that followed, I did nothing but rest. I read. I tended the garden. I had lunch with Viola. I needed to restore my strength, both physical and mental. That confrontation shook me more than I wanted to admit. But every time I watered my rose bushes, felt the warmth of the sun on my skin, I realized something was growing inside me. A cold, absolute resolve. Isaiah and Corinne had chosen their path. Now they would have to live with the consequences. 1 week after the confrontation, Isaiah called. His voice was completely different. Softer, almost childlike, the same voice he used when he was young and wanted to ask for something. Mom, can we talk? Please. I considered hanging up, but in the end I said, I'm listening. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what I did. He paused, and I heard something that sounded like real emotion in his voice. Or maybe it was just good acting. I was wrong, Mom. I can see that now. I let Corinne get into my head. I let the pressure of the wedding preparations drive me crazy. But you're my mother. I never should have... His voice caught. I'm sorry, Mom. Please. Can we fix this? A part of me, the part that used to rock him to sleep, teach him to ride a bike, cheer for him at graduations, wanted to believe him immediately, wanted to forgive immediately, wanted to go back to how it was. But I had finished learning the lesson of blind trust. What are you proposing, Isaiah? I'll pay the money back. All of it. He spoke faster, more urgently. Corinne and I will take out a loan if we have to. And the house situation, I'll fix it. I'll make sure the buyer doesn't sue. I'll handle everything. Just, please, drop the police investigation. I can't have a criminal record, Mom. It'll destroy my career, my whole life. A mistake. As if robbing your mother is the same as forgetting a birthday. How long will it take you to pay it back? Maybe 6 months, a year at most. We need time to borrow. Isaiah, you don't have 6 months, I said, enunciating each word. The investigation is already in motion. His voice changed, from soft to desperate. Then what do you want? Just tell me what you want! What I wanted was the old Isaiah back. Isaiah before Corinne, before greed. But maybe that person never existed. I want full restitution within 30 days, I said. Every dollar you took, plus interest. I want a written confession of what you did. I want you to face consequences. That's impossible. We can't get that kind of money in 30 days. Then you should have thought about that before you stole it. Desperation immediately turned into rage. God, you're heartless. He spat it out. I'm your son. Your only child. How can you do this to me? I didn't scream. I only asked very softly. Then how could you do what you did to me? Goodbye, Isaiah. I hung up, and I turned off my phone. That afternoon, Corinne came alone. I looked through the window and saw her step out of her car in a flawless cream-colored suit, hair perfectly styled as if she were headed to a meeting. She rang the doorbell 3 times before I came out. "Thelma, we need to talk. Woman to woman." Her smile was tight as a wire, but she tried to make it warm. "Can I come in?" "No." She blinked, surprised. "I'm trying to make peace here." "Then make it from the porch." Corinne's jaw tightened, but she still tried to stay calm. "Listen, I know you think I'm some gold digger who manipulated your son, but I love Isaiah. I truly do, and I'm trying to save him from this disaster." "By convincing me to drop the charges?" "By making you reasonable." Her mask slipped a little. "Do you understand what criminal charges will do to him? To his career? To our future?" "Yes," I said. "That is exactly why they need to be filed." Corinne stared at me. Then she laughed, a cold, bitter laugh. "You know what? Isaiah was right about you." Her voice sharpened. "You're a selfish old woman who can't stand seeing her son happy. You're so bitter and lonely you want to drag him down with you." "Are you finished?" "You'll regret this," she hissed. "When Isaiah is in prison, when your relationship is destroyed forever, you'll realize you chose money over your own son. You'll die alone. And it will be your fault." "Goodbye, Corinne." I shut the door right in front of her face, twisted with anger. That night, Viola came with her husband, Michael, and 2 other couples from the book club, the Johnsons and the Reeves. They brought food, wine, and something more valuable than anything: solidarity. We sat in the living room, and I told them everything, not only the facts, but the pain, the betrayal, and the guilt of having to prosecute my own son. They listened without judgment. "You're doing the right thing," Michael said firmly. "What Isaiah did is criminal. If you let him walk away, you're telling him he can betray anyone without consequences." Carol Johnson nodded. "My brother stole from my mother. She forgave him." No charges. 5 years later, he did it again. There are some people who only learn when there are consequences. Their support wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't heartless. I was just a woman protecting herself from someone who had clearly proven he could not be trusted, even if that person carried the name of my son. When they left, Viola squeezed my hand. "Be strong, Thelma. You're doing something hard, but it's the right thing." That night, I went to bed with a feeling I hadn't had in weeks. Peace. A kind of cold, hard peace, but real. Isaiah and Corinne had tried manipulation, tried threats, tried guilt. Nothing worked, because I had something they didn't understand: principles, self-respect, and friends who reminded me of my worth. The next morning, I called Nathaniel Price. No negotiation, no compromise. "We proceed with full prosecution." "All right," he said. "Thelma, if I may say, I think you're incredibly brave." Brave or wounded? I wasn't sure, but I was sure of one thing: I would not back down, not after they had shown me so clearly who they truly were. The court date arrived after 6 weeks of preparation. Throughout those 6 weeks, Nathaniel Price prepared me for every single thing: the procedure, the questions, how to control my emotions, and even the possibility that Isaiah would accept a plea bargain to reduce his sentence. But Isaiah, stubborn and delusional at the same time, refused it all. He insisted on fighting the charges, convinced that a jury would side with a son against a bitter mother filled with hatred. That morning, I wore a simple gray suit and minimal makeup. Nathaniel studied me for a moment, then nodded, as if he were checking something more important than clothing. "You are not a victim," he said. "You are a survivor." Philadelphia's courthouse was cold. Fluorescent lights reflected off the polished tile floors, making everything look as if it had been scrubbed clean of emotion. I sat behind the prosecution table, my hands folded calmly as I had practiced for weeks. Across the aisle, Isaiah sat beside Corinne Blake and his attorney, a sharply dressed man named Richard Chen, a specialist in defending white-collar criminals. When Isaiah's eyes met mine, I saw something I didn't expect: fear, real fear. Good. He was beginning to understand this wasn't a family argument. This was reality. The prosecutor, a strict woman named Andrea Walsh, built the case like a wall with no cracks. Bank records proved the unauthorized transfers, testimony from the title company about the forged power of attorney, expert analysis of the fraudulent notarization, testimony from the Henderson family about the illegal sale of the rental property. And very quickly, Isaiah's defense strategy became obvious. Turn me into a confused, bitter mother, then claim he only acted with my permission, and that my decision to accuse him now was merely regret and changing the story. Richard Chen stood to deliver his opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about a family misunderstanding and the buyer's regret. Thelma Jennings gave her son, Isaiah, access to her accounts and authorization for him to handle her property. Why? Because she is 62 years old, lives alone, and needed assistance managing her finances. Isaiah did not steal from his mother. He acted with her blessing. But now, influenced by outside parties and under the effects of age-related confusion, Mrs. Jennings has rewritten history to portray herself as a victim. I felt anger flare in my chest, hot and sharp. But I didn't let it show. I kept my face neutral, not because I was cold, but because I understood this was the stage of truth, not the stage of emotion. The trial moved steadily, methodically. Andrea called one witness after another, laying each brick into her case. A bank representative testified that I had called immediately when I discovered the money was gone, distressed and confused. A title company representative presented the fraudulent documents. Then a handwriting expert took the stand and explained how my signature on the power of attorney did not match my normal signature. Trembling strokes, weak pressure, the certainty gone. Exactly what you see when someone signs while exhausted or under coercion. This is not the signature of someone in a normal mental state, the expert said. This is the signature of someone who is weakened. Then it was my turn to testify. I stepped to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Andrea guided me through my story in a voice that was gentle but firm. I spoke about Isaiah, about the pride of raising him alone, and about the feeling of being torn apart when I discovered the betrayal. Mrs. Jennings, Andrea asked, did you give Isaiah permission to withdraw $127,000 from your savings account? No, I said clearly. Never. Did you give him permission to sell your rental property? No. That property produces additional income alongside my pension. I never authorized selling it. Did you sign a power of attorney granting Isaiah control over your finances? I took a deep breath. Not knowingly, I was hospitalized with severe pneumonia. My fever reached 104 degrees. Isaiah brought papers to my bedside, saying they were insurance forms. I was barely conscious. I don't remember what I signed. Then Richard Chen began his cross-examination. He fired questions like bullets, trying to force me into the image of a vindictive mother. Isn't it true, Mrs. Jennings, that you were resentful about Isaiah's marriage to Corinne? No, I replied. I am resentful because Isaiah stole my lifetime savings. You argued about his relationship, didn't you? We discussed it. But this has nothing to do with who he chose as a wife. This is about theft and fraud. You're a lonely woman, aren't you? Living alone with no close family besides Isaiah. I looked straight at him. I am content with my life, Mr. Chen. Independence does not make me hateful. Chen tried a few other angles, but none of them stuck. The truth stood on my side like solid stone. After that, Isaiah took the stand. Chen led him through the best possible version of the story. That he worried about me, that I wanted him to manage my finances, that I was happy to support the wedding. Isaiah performed the role perfectly. Sincere eyes, a voice trembling in the right places, emotional emphasis like he had rehearsed it. But then Andrea stood up, and I saw the shell begin to crack. Mr. Jennings, Andrea asked, you claim your mother asked you to help manage her finances. Specifically, when did she make that request? Isaiah hesitated. It was ongoing for several months. Do you have any documents proving this agreement? Emails, text messages, letters? It was verbal. I see. Andrea gave a small nod, then continued. And the power of attorney document. You say she signed voluntarily at the hospital, correct? Yes. But the notary whose seal appears on that document is confirmed to have been in California on that day. The hospital is in Pennsylvania. So how did that notary witness your mother's signature? Isaiah's face went white. I don't know. Maybe the records are wrong. An error? Andrea tilted her head. Or did you forge the notarization after obtaining your mother's signature under false pretenses? I didn't forge anything. Andrea changed direction. Let's talk about this property sale. Did you inform the buyer that the house had tenants with an active lease? I thought they were informed. By whom? The real estate agent should have. You presented yourself as the owner with full authority to sell. Andrea cut in, calm but sharp. Isn't it your responsibility to disclose all material information? Isaiah began to stammer. One sentence tripped over the next. The polished story fell apart piece by piece under direct questions. In the courtroom, I saw Corinne turn pale. Andrea delivered one final blow, like closing a coffin lid. The truth is, Mr. Jennings, you knew exactly what you were doing. You forged documents, sold property you did not own, stole your mother's savings, and you did it all for one reason, to finance your wedding and your new life. Isn't that correct? No. I was helping my mother. She wanted to be robbed? Andrea snapped. She wanted to lose her home? Objection! Chen jumped up. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. But by then, it was too late. The jury had seen Isaiah panic. Seen him contradict himself, seen him exposed as a liar. When arguments ended, I felt a strange calm, not because I was happy, but because I knew my part in this nightmare was over. I had told the truth, I had presented evidence, I had refused to be manipulated. The rest was out of my hands. Something very strange happens when you see your child on the witness stand. You stop remembering what he did to you. You only remember what kind of child he once was. And that's why the 3 hours of jury deliberation weren't 3 hours of waiting for a verdict. They were 3 hours of sitting in a cold hallway, asking yourself, am I burying the last remaining piece of a mother's love? But then you remember what he once said, I'll put you in a nursing home. And you understand. If you step back today, tomorrow you won't have the right to stand upright anymore. We stood when the jury left to deliberate. Isaiah turned and looked at me one last time. His eyes were empty, the kind of emptiness you see in someone who has just realized there is no way back. I held his gaze steady. This was the son I had raised, and this was the payment he had created for himself. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours I sat on the bench outside the courtroom, arms folded, my heartbeat steady but heavy. Viola sat beside me holding my hand. No matter what happens, she said, you did the right thing. Finally, we were called back in. The jury filed in, faces solemn, certain. On the charge of grand theft, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. Isaiah's face seemed to shatter. On the charge of fraud, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. Corinne let out a choked, broken sound. On the charge of forgery, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. I sat still, not because I felt nothing, but because I felt too much, until my body only knew how to remain motionless. Guilty. 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 The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Isaiah was released on bail, but the reality was clear as daylight. The life he had known was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The case had attracted local media attention. An elderly mother prosecuting her son for theft. A headline no one could resist. Mrs. Jennings, how do you feel about the verdict? A reporter called. I stopped, considered, then said clearly, I feel justice has been served. What my son did was criminal. He betrayed the person who loved him most, and he must face the consequences of that choice. Do you have a message for families dealing with elder financial abuse? Yes. I looked straight into the camera. You are not obligated to protect the person who harms you, even if they're family, especially if they're family. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling wrongdoing. Nathaniel walked me to the car. We drove away from the crowd and the noise. The sentencing hearing was brutal to watch. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Hendress, listened to impact statements from multiple sides. The Henderson family described the stress and fear of nearly losing their home. The buyer spoke about the financial nightmare Isaiah had caused. I spoke about betrayal, the violation of trust, and the emotional devastation. Then Isaiah's attorney asked for leniency. After that, Isaiah stood. His voice trembled. His eyes were red. This time, the tears seemed real. Your Honor, Isaiah said, I know I can't undo what I did. I betrayed my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for me. I let greed and poor judgment destroy our relationship. I understand I must face punishment. I only ask for mercy, for a chance to rebuild my life, and maybe one day make amends. Judge Hendress looked at him for a long time. Her face was unreadable. Then she said slowly and distinctly, Mr. Jennings, you did not make a mistake. You made a series of calculated choices. You forged documents. You exploited your mother's illness. You committed fraud against multiple parties. This was not a crime of impulse or desperation. This was a crime of entitlement and greed. She paused, as if to let each word sink into the room. You showed no remorse until you were caught. You threatened your mother when she sought justice. You do not deserve leniency. She sentenced Isaiah to 7 years in prison, eligible for parole after 4. In addition, full restitution to me and the property buyer, plus court costs and fines, totaling more than $200,000. Isaiah collapsed into his chair, sobbing. Corinne sat frozen, her face like a mask of horror. As the officers led Isaiah away in handcuffs, he turned and looked back at me one last time. I looked straight into his eyes. But I said nothing, not because I had won, but because there truly was nothing left to say. After the sentencing hearing, Nathaniel and I met in his office to talk about the restitution order. The court has frozen Isaiah and Corinne's assets, Nathaniel explained, his voice steady and firm. The condo they purchased will be sold. Their bank accounts will be seized. They'll be paying you back for years, possibly decades. I nodded, feeling those words land as heavy as stones in the palm of my hand. And Corinne? I asked. She wasn't charged criminally because Isaiah was the primary actor, Nathaniel said, but she's responsible for restitution as his wife. Her wages can be garnished. Her assets can be seized. She'll pay the price for his crime, right beside him. I thought of the woman who had once called me a selfish old lady, who had stood on my porch trying to turn me into the guilty one, and who had dragged behind her promises so sweet they were frightening, about grandchildren. Justice, it turns out, has its own way. In the weeks that followed, the consequences spread like an oil slick no one could wipe away. Isaiah lost his job in finance. No company wanted to hire a convicted criminal. Corinne, who had flooded social media with wedding photos and inspirational quotes, vanished completely, as if she had never existed. Friends and colleagues began to avoid them. The wedding congratulations hadn't even had time to cool before silence settled over everything. Their condo was sold in a foreclosure at a low price, and then I received the first restitution payment, $15,000 from the sale of the condo. It would take years to recover the full amount, I knew, but the system had started moving, and that alone was enough for me to breathe again. The Henderson family sent me a card. Thank you for having the courage to stand up for what is right. You saved our home and taught our children an important lesson about justice. I held the card in my hands, read it again and again, and then placed it on my kitchen table as if setting down an anchor. It reminded me that what I did wasn't only about saving myself, it also saved innocent people who had been pulled into that fraud. Viola hosted a small dinner to celebrate the end of the trial. Friends from the book club raised their glasses to strength, resilience, and my refusal to become a victim. "You did something remarkable, Thelma," Michael said. "Most people would have backed down, but you stood your ground." I looked down at the plate in front of me, then answered honestly, "I didn't have a choice. Isaiah didn't leave me another choice." But even among laughter and clinking glasses, I still felt a strange emptiness. I had won in court, but I had also lost my son. The boy I once rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, cheered through every milestone, that person didn't exist anymore. Or maybe I was simply the last one to realize he had been gone for a long time. 6 months after Isaiah was convicted, I began a new chapter. I started a consulting business to help older adults protect themselves from financial abuse. Viola joined me. We held workshops at community centers across Pennsylvania, traveling from place to place like people carrying lived experience, not to seek credit, but to stop tragedy from repeating itself. We taught people how to recognize warning signs. Someone asking for account information to help. Pressure to add a name to a bank account. Being isolated from friends and family, documents being forced on you for signatures in the hospital or when you're sick, promises of care in exchange for money. Every person I helped felt like a life being pulled back from the edge. And strangely, my pain began to have a purpose. On my 63rd birthday, Viola threw me a surprise party. The living room was packed. Co-workers from the library, friends from the book club, even people who had attended our workshops, faces that had stood by me in my darkest season. Looking around that room, I suddenly understood something with perfect clarity. Isaiah was wrong. I wasn't alone. I had community. I had purpose. And I still had the ability to feel happiness. Real happiness. Not the flashy kind that lasts 5 hours and leaves ash behind. Meanwhile, Isaiah's world kept collapsing. Prison was brutal. He was attacked twice in the first 6 months. He developed depression, struggled with anxiety. Corinne divorced him after 8 months, claiming she was a victim too. She moved back in with her parents, worked 2 retail jobs to pay restitution. Her social media disappeared. No one wanted to date a woman who had robbed an elderly mother. Isaiah's finance career was destroyed. Employers sued him. His certifications were revoked. Parole was denied. There were no job prospects, no support letters, no evidence of rehabilitation. He would serve the full 7 years. Looking back now, 3 years later, I understand what happened. I loved Isaiah so completely that I forgot to teach him to love me back. I gave without boundaries, sacrificed without limits. And by doing that, I accidentally raised someone who believed he had the right to take. The biggest lesson I learned was this. Love without respect is worthless. Family without integrity is meaningless. And sometimes, the most painful choice is the most correct one. My son is in prison because he committed crimes, not because I'm full of hatred, but because he chose greed over love. I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself. Recently, I received a letter from Isaiah, the first one in 3 years. I sat outside in the garden with the envelope in my hands, my fingers shaking as I opened it. "Dear Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I betrayed you in the worst way possible. I let greed and Corinne's influence blind me to what truly matters. Prison has given me time to think, to truly think about the person I became and the person I should have been. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know you did the right thing. By not letting me escape the consequences, you taught me the lesson I needed to learn. I love you. I always have, and I'm sorry. Isaiah." I folded the letter. Tears slid down my cheeks. Was it real remorse or just another manipulation? I don't know. And this time, I don't need to know. I chose myself. And that choice, paradoxically, led me into the richest season of my life. I found purpose, community, and real happiness. And I send out a message that echoes farther than any courtroom. Mothers deserve respect. Older adults deserve protection. And a crime against family is still a crime. What would you do if your children betrayed you like this? Would you have the strength to choose justice over guilt? Thank you for listening to my story this far. I hope this story helps someone out there recognize the warning signs, set healthy boundaries, and remember that protecting yourself is not selfish. It's survival. If this story touched you, even just a little, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next stories about family, boundaries, betrayal, and awakening. And if you want me to tell more stories like this, leave a comment. I choose respect. So I know you're here and you're standing on your own side too.